Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going very well. Yeah, we're excited for the fall and all the cross-training we've been doing.
Yes, which is why I actually really wanted to bring our friend John Shep back on the podcast. He is a ultra runner. He's the host of the Athletics Ontario Running Podcast, which I've been on a couple times. They were actually this makes me sound way cooler than I am. They were the first people to interview me after my Leadville disaster. I'm not going to lie, John and I cried a little bit as we recorded that one. But that was a really cool episode. We'll link to that in the show notes. And John is actually a super rad ultra runner himself. He just completed this thing that he completely made up, but I love.
Okay, well, it might be of interest to some listeners, though.
The Triple Crown of Ontario. So we get into exactly what that looked like, but it was 300 milers, all within Ontario, that he did over the summer. He's a teacher, and it was the absolute worst timing that you could possibly do a series of races, because one was during the end of the school year. One was in the summer. That was great. And then one was like the week school started.
Okay.
So just like classic teacher situation. But I mean, he did awesome and he crushed it. And it definitely has given me, I'm not going to lie, a little FOMO. I'm thinking about it. Do you
recall the races? It was something and then Sulfur Springs and then...
No, Sulfur Springs was the first one.
Okay.
There's the Halliburton one and Tally in the Valley.
Okay. 3 great events. And we love that Sulfur Springs one, especially. It's right where the Paris Ancaster bike race, it starts and finishes where the Paris Ancaster finishes. So yeah, I don't know if we're going back next year, but we'd like to.
I would definitely say
yes. And you've already
yes.
said you might try this Triple Crown.
I said I might try this
for someone who said they would never do 100 milers.
Okay, but this made me really rethink, because we had a really good discussion about the whole racing locally thing, which is something that I think, it's very easy in today's fast-paced society and social media and stuff to get really caught up in these big races. And there's obviously, I love the Leadvilles, the Big Sugars, the Unbounds of the world. But I think we're actually going to see, and I've now seen a few articles to this effect, we're going to see the return of the local race in the next couple of years as being where more people want to be. Because I think like the pandemic, squashed racing for a couple of years. So then when it came back, everyone kind of had a bit of travel fever. They all wanted to go to the destination races.
Pent up registrations too, right?
Yeah. But now that everyone has, spent their money, gone to the places, I think now a lot of us are kind of looking for like, well, what feels not easier, but like what feels easier logistically, let's say, and financially, to be honest, because I mean, we're in a weird economic time as well. So like, when you're looking at the budget, like I'll say Leadville cost us thousands. Like I don't even want to think about the total cost of Leadville.
For sure. And you have to do something, but it is something to remember. I guess there's also I guess we're a little privileged in that we have races around us, but I would say running especially is pretty continent wide. There's some type of run nearby, but yeah, definitely you may have to travel depending on the type of event you're doing.
Mm-hmm. But for any organizers listening, before we get into this episode with John, where we also talk about some runner safety things as we're getting into fall, as we're getting into low light, the reason we had him on was he had a bit of a scare with a car that he and I had been texting about after he'd kind of finished the third of the Triple Crown races. And we talk all through that and then kind of like back out into, how you can kind of avoid, hopefully, getting hit by cars as much as possible during the fall and winter when people don't expect to see runners on the road. But as we talked about race organizing, it also made me think about our lovely favorite sponsor, Payable Apps. So this is where you can take payments in a Google form. And, we worked with the company to develop a lot of the templates and stuff that are free to use that really help you get started. And because we're bike nerds and running nerds, a lot of the templates are actually really, I'm going to say like bike and run coded, where we have like, we're stuff for like athlete sponsorship and, team t-shirts and team registration and race registration.
That's
and
right.
we know a few race organizers now that are using it.
Payable sponsored the 24 hours of Summer Solstice, our Chico event, local event. So we were down there. They did the light show for the Midnight Oasis there as well. But that's something, again, where you have a team trying to register for the event and you have to share costs. So you could even send up a Google form and get everyone's t-shirt sizes, get them to pay for their share of the event. So even for small groups, even if you're not organizing a race, you could use this Google form linked up to your PayPal, Square, or Stripe account to collect the funds and the information. That's really the thing, is you can't collect payment in a Google form. We always use the Google form. We all have them. But to connect that payment just simplifies everything so much. And then our local mountain bike club here in Collingwood, we also use it just for our membership. So you can assign people the membership and they can pay, they can tell you their name, their email, whatever. And then, you save a ton of money versus some of the more complicated systems that are designed for big organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, we know a lot of people who've used it for small weekly race series and stuff like that. So definitely, if that's, if you're listening to this and you're a race director who's trying to kind of figure out how to streamline that a little bit, like you want to just have like a Wednesday night, whether it's run club or Wednesday night race or
weekly
whatever.
Race, right? It's not that complicated. You need the person's name and you need them to pay the $10, right? And this keeps you, you know who's coming, you know who's paid. You can do season registration and night of. It has all those features, but it just gives you a nice spreadsheet where you can check and see who's coming and who's paid and who you need to chase for payment. It's just very, very simple.
Yeah, so you can check that out over at payableapps.com. Again, the template library is over there, so you can kind of get started within a couple minutes.
And basically, if you're curious, definitely reach out. You can use our contact form. Their help desk is very, very good. They'll help you through it. But reach out to us if you just need help setting up your weekly race, and we can definitely help you too. So feel free to reach out through our contact page.
All right, let's get into this episode with John Shep. Enjoy. Before we get started talking about the safety element, we got to talk about the Triple Crown. Okay, John, talk to me about how you came up with this genius, horrific, dumbass idea.
Thank you. So as people who have listened to the AO Running podcast knows, as people I've been on your podcast gratefully, it's the Ontario running community is something that my grandfather gave a lot of his years to as a Olympic level track coach. And my mom has given it to the Paralympic and Canadian centers as well. So for me, Ontario has been this passion project for the past almost 3 years through the work I've been doing with Athletics Ontario and the Trailing Running podcast. And having worked with Sulfur Springs Trail Race, and you and I riffed off of that on our podcast a few months ago, and this wonderful race, Tally in the Valley, in the middle of the year, and then Halliburton 100. We have 3 amazing 100-mile races in Ontario. They're trail races, and I was sort of looking at some of the stats, and I'm not fast. I am never going to win a race. I might accidentally come in second every once in a while because I'm too dumb to fall down. But I looked at this
I gotta stop you right there. I love that. That's like the most humble, just like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna like finish these 100 milers. I might come in second. I won't win.
Said somebody who's won one, by the way.
The one that I've done, yeah.
So it was, and so we have these 3 iconic events, and looking back at it, and Sulfur Springs has been around for 30 plus years with the Burlington Run Club, and the Halliburton 100's been around for 30 plus years, and the Halliburton Forest, and then Tally in the Valley, which is Happy Trails Racing, has been on not quite for 10 years, but 8, and then there's some COVID stuff in between. And nobody had done all 3 in the same calendar year. And some people had done 2. Largely, they'd done Sulfur Springs and then Tally in the Valley, but Halliburton 100, no one had done all 3. And I said, you know what? I can go as slow as humanly possible. And the first 2 have 30-hour cutoffs. Last one is a 33-hour cutoff. So if I dedicate 93 hours of my life to these 3 races, I can be the first one to ever do it. And so that was kind of the pitch was I want to give publicity to these 3 events. And I'm not by any stretch sort of this guru or this huge public face, but to make these 3 races feel like there are people out there that value them, that cherish them, not even just value them, but, and I mean, I'm sure we'll go into it in terms of what these 3 events were like, but they were not easy events. The weather at all 3 was differently was differently difficult, let's say, for a really great alliteration there. But it was the community at all three came out, supported the runners supported each other. And that's ultimately why I wanted this goal, was not for me necessarily, but for saying to the community, hey, you do one, you do two, there's this threesome that you can do of races, and it's really, really bloody cool.
Mm-hmm. I love it. And I think there's something to be said about this idea of keeping things local, because I think we often think that huge challenges have to be these far-flung destinations. They have to be these like, legendary races like Leadville. Obviously, that was my thing. But I love that you took, I mean, I'm going to say it's still legendary races, like great races, all really well run, having, known people that have done all of them, having done Sulfur Springs, not 100, just 50 miles of it. But I think there's something I love about you're going to race locally, but you're still going to make it epic, if that makes sense. Because I think so many people think that they can't do like an epic thing because they, don't have the money to travel, or they, don't have time to travel, or, all these things. But you can make these challenges that are just so cool. So I love that.
Well, when you do some of the larger events, that was part of the project with Sulfur Springs at the beginning of the year, was they wanted to have a Western States qualifier in Ontario, because for a lot of people, it's hundreds and thousands of dollars to travel to races, to qualify for races, tens of thousands of dollars in some of those cases. And you've got to wait 6 or 7 years. So yeah, celebrating local and celebrating these races that we have right here. And I've fallen into that trap before, where it's got to be like, I work with Athletics Ontario. Well, why am I not working for Athletics Canada? My mom's the chair there. But there's something great about being able to say, in this province, we have an athletics organization that supports road runners and trail runners, and they've been out to Tally in the Valley, and they've been out to the TCS Toronto Waterfront Marathon, and they've also put on their own race with the Trillium Running Festival the past couple of years. And it's okay to be really great locally. You don't have to be the epic. You don't have to be the Canadian. I mean, I may have some people listen to our podcast in Saskatchewan, and no ill will to Saskatchewan, but it's okay to really celebrate Ontario and to celebrate,
100%.
as you said, local.
Yeah. And it's the whole like think global, act local concept. And I think, I talk about this in the Athlete's Guide to Sponsorship, even. I think a lot of people kind of skip where they are and focus on these like broader things. I always say like the best sponsor you could ever have is your local bike shop, but everyone wants like the bike brand as a sponsor. Same with like running, your best sponsor is probably your local run shop, but everyone wants Hoka or On or Nike or whatever. And I think, yeah, this local focus is awesome. And I think no matter what sport you're in, kind of thinking about like, what is the local challenge I can think about for next year, especially if you're maybe in my boat and thinking like, I am so sick of spending thousands and thousands of dollars on travel for races.
But in the miles, and I mean, we can get into the environmentalism of it all, where the driving and the flying and the this, that, and the third. I mean, during COVID, one of the only positives was that we reflected on, where do we really want our money to go? Do we want them to go to the big boxes, or do we want it to go to the local farmers market? And I don't know about you, but we had a very intentional thought process of, let's support the local farm, let's support the local butcher, let's support the whomever. It wasn't like, hey, No Frills is going to go out of business. Like, trust me, Loblaws ain't going out of business, folks. I think we've all seen that in the news. And so kind of having that same value system with the races that we have. And yes, there's great races across Canada, but we've got some really cool stuff in Ontario as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's actually really interesting. This is really becoming a thing in cycling too. There was actually just an article this morning on Velo that was talking about are the big gravel races killing local gravel? And in some places they are, because the big gravel race not only has taken, like, pulled away people from the local stuff, but then also like permitting has gotten harder for smaller races, because of how the big races are impacting the roads and stuff like that. So I think the more we can support the local stuff, I hear people complain all the time that there isn't enough local racing around here. But then when there are local races, they don't do them. So if you want to have this stuff in Ontario or wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this, you have to actually do the local races to make them want to continue having them. So, yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the weather at 3 different races, because I would love to know. I mean, first, just like talk us through what the weather was for each of them. And like, if you had to pick like one top thing you learned from the weather at each of them that you're taking with you into future races.
So see, I know a few years ago we talked about your dual citizenship. You're truly Canadian when the thing we want to talk about at the races are the weather. So I will give you our Canadian kudos. But it was so Sulfur Springs Trail Race, and I will quote my good friend Molly, mud like peanut butter. It was.
Oh my gosh. I've never seen mud like that. And I race cyclocross, which is the muddiest sport you can possibly do. But that mud was disgusting. I've never had like a shoe come off in a race before.
Yeah, and get that real sucking sound, like you're got quicksand, you're falling through. That was the mud at Sulfur Springs, and so that was not the easiest. I know I was amongst the crew that fell more than a couple of times, but it was, I mean, you went there and they put on an epic event. They pulled out all the stops. They had 1,200 runners. They got their Western States qualifier. Spoiler alert, I finished that one, and ta-da, belt buckle number 1 in our discussion today. But it very much was, they are putting their money where, I mean, we brought it up, money where their mouths are. And they put on an event that said, we want to be not just a local 100-mile event, but one that can stand up to some of the other events in other provinces and in the US as well. And they absolutely did it. So that was Sulfur Springs, was mud, and there was some rain and fog mixed in just for, some variety. But it was great to see that how big an event can get in Ontario while still retaining its soul, and while still retaining, and I've used this phrase before, they still wore their white hats, and they didn't gouge runners. They put it on for, I mean, none of us make money in the running industry unless you're a Hoka or an On or a what have you. They were wearing their white hats. And so that was number 1. And number 2 was the end of July. It's Tally in the Valley. So our wonderful friends at Happy Trails Racing, and it was hot. It was 35 degrees. My kids both survived for about 20 minutes and then went popsicle hunting. It was that was a hot one. But if anyone's done Tally in the Valley, it's a 7K loop, and you come across this trail tap at about 3K. They reverse the loop each year, so it can either be 3K or 4K, and that's a lifesaver. If you're not using that, you're dunking your head, you're dunking your arms, it's heat management. And it was, but I mean, even then, I talk about the community. My last loop there was a woman who, and again, the heat got everybody. I mean, as hot of a race it had about the same finisher percentage as Sulfur Springs. So that sort of gives you the parallel. But I was going in my last loop, and there's this lady who's on a bench shivering. Now it's early morning, but we're still 25, 30 degrees. So clearly something's wrong. And the woman had been a part of the race. So I was fortunate. I'd had the Byron Guptill, who's the volunteer coordinator, on my cell. And so I texted him and called him and said, hey, there's a woman that needs emergency services. And he brought it up, and it was amazing. This woman's so profusely apologetic, saying, like, I'm so sorry I'm making you wait. It's like, what am I going to do? Run away from the woman who's going in shock just for the sake of, and hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Yes, belt buckle number 2. Like, we got to wear the white hats. And that was one of the things that I was really grateful about with Tally in the Valley.
Okay. But be honest, were you looking at your watch figuring like, okay, as long as someone gets here at this time, I can still get to the finish line in under the cutoff?
So I finished tally in 23 hours, 43 minutes, 28
Oh my God. So
seconds.
you had
So
like so
I
much
had
time.
17 minutes to spare for that one. But I mean, all joking aside, right? Like I got my kids at the finish line. What am I going to say? It's like, I abandoned some woman to get my 24-hour buckle. Like, really? That's the life lesson you want for your kids? Nah, I'm good wearing the white hat. And I mean, the universe allowed me to get the 24-hour buckle, but if it was, they've got a different buckle for the sub 24 and over. If I was over 24, I would be wearing that thing with pride, and I'd be wearing my white hat with it, because that's the type of racers we want to be, and the type of community we want to have, and honestly, the type of lessons I want to give to my kids.
100%. Yeah. And actually, I want to come back to one thing you mentioned about Sulfur Springs, which is that none of us are making money in the running industry, which is so true. And I do want to just point that out because it's the same in the cycling industry. So anytime anyone's complaining about really high race fees, they're not. I promise you, they're not. No one is going home in their Rolls Royce or whatever an expensive car, Tesla, I don't know, whatever an expensive car is.
We run and ride bikes, so we don't get to go get those cars.
Like, what is it, a McLaren? Like, I don't know. Anyway.
But you're absolutely right, and I mean, we all feel it at gas pumps, we feel it at grocery stores. But you know who buys a heck of a lot of bananas? Races. And you know who buys a lot of porta potties that have to get trucked in with gas? Races. And
you know who I appreciate for buying a lot of porta potties?
Races, yes. Can never have a dearth of porta potties. There is never too many porta potties. It's so yes, thank you for bringing that up, and it's a testament to what we love about this, that it is a love project. I don't think anybody is doing this, those three races especially, like Sulfur Springs, the love for the community, the Tally in the Valley, Jeff Rowthorne, the race director there, the love for the community, and I mean, bringing it to the Halliburton 100, the love for the forest. And they put on this event as sort of one of their pinnacle events to support the Halliburton forest. And so they funnel a lot of that money as part of their jobs into the conservation of this wonderful area in Ontario. That cheap segue, that I was fortunate enough to run the 100-miler in at the beginning of September, and hint, hint, nudge, nudge, buckle number 3. And yes, we had mud like peanut butter too, and we had rocks and we had roots, and it rained and then it poured and then it drizzled and then it spat and then it did a combination of all four for, well, my time was 28 hours, 48 minutes. And for some people, because it's a 33-hour cutoff, for 33 hours. And you know what? There were, out of 600 runners, there were only 17 finishers in the 100-miler. So that kind of gives you, I think there were about 70 who started, and it was each of those finishers who completed it. They knew that they had done something really cool. And I was fortunate enough on the run, I actually found somebody else who was doing the Triple Crown. So Trevor Dale, and we on the AO Running Podcast have an episode with him our first week in October. And so he actually beat me by 2 hours. So I told you I wasn't going to be the fastest, and I wasn't. So he completed all 3 in 76 hours, 20 minutes. And so Mr. Triple Crown of Ontario 100-milers, Trevor Dale, has the throne that I'm sure someone of your athletic ilk might be able to. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to pull you as soon as you're out, pull you back in, right?
Didn't I tell you I was done with hundreds?
It was so funny, because never a moment in my mind, and you asked why I did it, and it was very much for the Ontario community, and never in that, like literally the second loop I'm going on, and I'm like, oh, you've done Sulfur Springs this year, you've done Tally in the Valley this year, you're doing Halliburton, and oh yeah, you won Tally in the Valley. So clearly your cumulative time is really good at this point. And there never was a moment where I'm like, okay, I'm going to throw an elbow and make sure that you trip on a rock, right? Like, but I mean, facetiously, it was, wow, this is really cool that a happy accident. I got to meet somebody who's doing the same thing, and I really hope you finish, and we go into this in our episode. He had a rougher day than I did. He ended up 31 plus hours, and we came in. It's a 4-loop course. We came in at the same time after loop 2, so he had a much harder second half of the race. But through it all, I'm just like, he's got to finish. He's got to finish. I don't care where he finished. It would be really cool for this to be something that we can gift to the Ontario running community.
I love that. And you may have convinced me only because I have told you I'm done with hundreds, but specifically because of the logistical challenges surrounding them and the whole, like, you need, it takes a village, and bringing, Peter, and bringing, family to these races is really difficult and really expensive, and it's asking a lot of them. But all of these are looped courses, which means support for them is actually significantly easier. And because they're local, there's actually like very minimal like ask on anyone for those. So okay.
At least okay, so we got the little nugget in here, and what I will say is we had I'm going to say 2.5 out of 3 races. The weather was pretty cruddy, so the odds of you having 3 of 3 is pretty low next year. So 2025 may be the Ontario Triple Crown for Molly year.
Where's some like wood I can knock on here?
It was fun. It was the first time in a long time I got to just bring my wife out to a race and have her crew me, and just kind of be like, this is something that we have together. It's the first time my kids came out and crewed a 100-miler, and didn't make it easier by any stretch of the imagination, but it did make it a better story. And then we had Sulfur Springs, which is sort of this crowning achievement for the Ontario running community. And so, like I said, 2025, come and get it. You can beat Trevor's time. Let's go.
I am going to think very hard about this. It's funny. I literally just today, and partially because I'm working on both of the features for Canadian Cycling Magazine and Canadian Running Magazine for like the New Year issue. So I've had to think of 2 totally new ways to think about goal setting. I've also written the future for Canadian cycling for the past 10 years. So every year I have to come up with a new goal setting concept. So I've been knee deep in that today, and it has made me finally start feeling like, okay, I can think about next year now. Like, it has been long enough. It's been a month. I can now start thinking like, okay, where do I want to go? So Triple Crown is
I'll definitely throw that in. So, okay, I'll flip it on its head. So goal setting, I've got nothing on the books. What is your tip for thinking about what, and I'm going to be 40 in a couple of years, so I got some milestone stuff coming up. Like, what is your tip for if I'm looking? I mean, maybe it's a little preview of your articles, but I really have no idea what I want to do next.
I think that's because you're such a content human. So I think that does make things difficult, John. Because I think the most helpful one that I've been really running through the filter, actually, there are a couple for you, especially since you're a teacher. The first one, though, that I've really liked is like, where do you feel like you were missing out in the past like year or couple of years? Because I think like kind of where you have FOMO tends to actually be like where you sort of like should be thinking about going. So, for you have been racing local. So maybe there is like a little bit of like, that Western States thing looks kind of neat. Maybe I kind of want to do that.
Well, hey, if I got somebody to come crew me, then by all means. It's funny you brought the FOMO thing up, though, because for me, some of the things I miss out on are our local shorter races. And I mean, shorter ultras, right? There are many more 50Ks in Ontario than there are 100-milers. And I started to feel like, oh, well, it's just, we use that term, quote unquote, just a 50K. But they're awesome events. Those are great community. I think that might be okay. I gave you one, you gave me one. So we're walking away better off for having this conversation.
100%. Yeah. And then Peter and I always talk about it, and I put that in this year's article. Spoiler alert, depending on how, is going to get the issue in a couple months. But we always talk about can you prepare for the goal you've set, and do you want to? So, I mean, this is a big question. Like, would have been a big question for you because you're a teacher. So let's just throw in like how these races fell. Were you even done with the school year when Sulfur Springs happened?
Nope. Sulfur Springs, it was end of May, so I still had a month to go.
And Halliburton 100 happened the week prior to starting up school again.
And with one kid going into JK and one kid going into grade 1, it was, yeah, it definitely wasn't a quiet taper. I will say that.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say that that was a dumb idea, but like
I plussed it a little bit.
like I can understand. Like I mean, at some point, like yes, the races you want to do fall at awkward times. You gotta, you gotta kind of deal with that. But for a lot of people, we see so many people that book family vacations the week ahead of Leadville, or like have like a giant work trip that they know is happening, and they still put their A race like the week after it. So thinking through, like, can you actually like do that? Does that actually make sense? Even kind of backing it out months before that, like, can you actually do the training you have to do to prepare for that? We see a lot of people in the city that are doing, their goal is like the Leadville mountain bike race, for example, but they have no trails. Are they willing to drive to the forest like every weekend to get ready for it? Can they? Do they want to? Good filters.
And those are good questions. Can they and do they want to? And it's never, I mean, you are an author. I've read a number of your books, both before and after publishing. The best book that has ever been written doesn't get written because it's either because perfect is the enemy of done. And yeah, in a perfect world, would I have wanted a couple of weeks either side of Halliburton, or having not had to walk through the halls with my recovery slides and my socks? People asking, it's like, why aren't you wearing dress shoes? It's like, well, to be fair, my feet don't fit into my dress shoes right at this moment in time because I ran 100 miles. So it's never going to be perfect, but you know what? We're not going to be able to get that and still do really cool stuff.
I just thought of a product. You know how there's like all those sweatpants that look like jeans or that look like dress pants, but they're still sweatpant material?
So 100-mile recovery pants.
Recovery pants, but also a dress shoe that looks like a dress shoe, but actually fits like an UGG boot kind of situation. Someone could make a fortune.
There. I mean, we said money doesn't get made in the running and cycling industry. I think you just have an idea there.
Right? Like formal shoes that you can wear when you have tons of blisters and black toenails. And my toes are fine. I looked and I was like, I have all my toenails right now. This is first time in like 2 years. This is great. Very exciting. And I did actually I had recovery on my list of things I wanted to ask you about. I mean, you're a busy dude. You're teaching. You've got 2 young kids. You're also doing the Athletics Ontario podcast. We will link that in the show notes, by the way. What did recovery look like? And I mean, obviously, I know it's not going to be like super optimal, but clearly you've been able to do it. So how do you do it?
Yeah, it was in this trifecta of races, one of the things that I appreciated was the speed at which I was able to recover to about 80%. I was never going to be able to get back to 100% like I was before Sulfur Springs, because you neglect physio, you neglect some really heavy strength training that I know caused some hamstring weakness throughout, because you're racing. You taper, you race, you recover. You taper, you race, you recover. And so I knew I could get to 80% after about 5 or 6 days. And I'm only going to end up getting it 100% probably in a few weeks from now, sort of 6 weeks after Halliburton. And one of the things that I wasn't anticipating was that quick recovery, was being able to go out, because for my brain, I wanted to run, especially, again, you brought it up, beginning of the school year after Halliburton, I wanted to run. And so being able to do that was cool, but it was a lot of compression pants, a lot of Epsom salts, a lot of stretching, a lot of rolling. It's the stuff that we neglect to do when we're doing this sort of taper, race, recover cycle.
Totally, yeah. I actually was talking to my physio as I'm kneeling at the ankle, and we were saying the problem with hitting your mid-30s is you suddenly realize you really should be spending about as many hours as you spend running every week on all of the stuff to make sure that you can continue running every week. which is a lot of out like, and the point is that it's like a 1-to-1. So if you're if you're running 10 hours a week, you actually should be spending that 10 hours on mobility and yoga and strength and sitting in the compression boots or foam rolling or any of those things. God knows we're not, but we probably should.
Well, and I actually ran significantly faster after the Halliburton 100-miler by total accident. And I think this is probably where you and I had connected. So it was about 2 days after Halliburton, and I'm sitting in my office, and I've just finished. So, I mean, 48 hours after a 100-miler, you can barely climb upstairs. And I got a radio call. So I'm a special ed teacher, and I support a couple of community classes that have our fully contained autism classes. And so these are individuals that are going to be in school until they're 21. And we try our best to teach them life skills and social skills and the ability to cope after that age of 21. And so one of our grade 9s, they were going shopping at Loblaws, sort of the name drop from earlier. And on their way back, this young lady was having an escalation. So we call it an escalation, but and for the privacy of the individual, I won't go specifically into what that escalation is, but I got a call on the radio saying, "Can you come out and support?" And so I get up out of my chair and I run, and I'm immediately thinking, wow, I didn't think I'd be able to run this well 2 days after the 100-mile. This feels great. And then it kind of turned sideways. So I'm crossing the road. I am at the crosswalk. I've got the green light, and I look behind my left shoulder to make sure, as I enter the crosswalk, to make sure that the people turning right aren't going to turn right. And then I make it to the end of the crosswalk, and lo and behold, there's somebody coming directly into it. It's going to run the red light and go into the right turn lane. And so seeing this out of the corner of my eye, I know I'm not getting out of the way in time. I jump out of the way. Guy keeps going. I land on the hood of his car, roll off. And it's funny. I tell my runner friends that I ran 100-milers and they get it. I tell my spec ed friends the rest of this story and they get it too. I get up, I grab my walkie-talkie, I grab my phone, and I go straight for the kid to make sure that they're okay and to make sure the team's okay, because they've been dealing with this too. According to the team, the driver kind of got out of his car, looked up, saw that I kept going, and booked it out of there. So it was, not so. To answer your recovery question, I would say not getting hit by a car is probably pretty high up on the list.
Yeah, number 1 point, don't get more injured than your body already is. Also, it sounds like getting up and running that fast is clearly like similar to, like when a kid's trapped under a car, the mom can like flip a minivan kind of situation. A lot of adrenaline happening.
Absolutely. And thankfully everybody was, well, minus the guy who got hit by the car. Everybody else involved was okay. And the young lady came back, and we've learned a lot, and we'll do it again, because to provide the family and work with the family on that life skill to be able to take your kids shopping is something that we take for granted, but is something amazing that we can work with this family for. So I've had people ask me, it's like, oh, well, if you did it again, would you walk? And I said, you know what? First time that we've ever seen this young lady do this, my team's first time they've seen it. No, I'm running. I'm, as we talked about, I'm wearing that white hat and I'm running. Like, it's just what we do.
And I mean, I think the fact with that is walking would not have changed that outcome. Like, obviously it would have changed the timing, but it wouldn't have changed the driver hitting you. And actually the worst time I ever got hit by a car was a similar situation, but I was walking in a crosswalk and got hit, and like same thing, flipped onto the guy's hood, broke his windshield with my forehead, rolled off. Oh, all good. It was
okay. It was tell me that one, because I know that I texted you after it happened. I said, "Hey, here's a way to plus 100-mile recovery: get hit by a car." And so we start going back and forth. So what was your? And you had alluded to the fact that, and I'm fortunate. This was my one and only really bad. I mean, we all get the car that zooms past, and we kind of tap its window because it's running in the crosswalk. What was, you had kind of alluded to the fact that this was not a one and done for you.
Oh, no. I mean, this is that was my only walking one, but cycling, probably had like 3 more minor incidents with cars, although one of them that I got doored and the guy actually fractured my cheekbone, like opening the door into me. Um, the one where I was walking the crosswalk was definitely the worst one. Conveniently, though, a couple days before Halloween. So everyone was like, oh my God, your makeup is amazing. That's like,
yep, winning first place there.
Yeah, it's just stitches, 2 black eyes. It was great. So at any rate, all that to say, like I was, again, walking. Like this was just college. I was walking. So I don't think that we can say like running necessarily was because of that. That is a dumbass driver not paying attention.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you, my friend.
However, I do think, this is something we talk a lot about as cyclists, but we don't talk about a ton as runners, which is a big part of why I wanted to have you on today, because I think we're coming into, as we kind of talked about in the beginning of this, we're coming into the season where people don't expect to see dummies like us out running, which means we are, in a lot less of a safe situation than we are on a sunny summer day when there are tons of people out recreating. So drivers are kind of a bit more attuned to it. We're also running low on daylight. I don't know about you, but more and more of my workouts are starting to happen. Like I've been going to a local yoga place in the morning and I was like, oh, no problem. I'll bike over. And the classes are at 6:30. And I was like, oh, this will be totally fine. Go out the first day. I was like, holy crap, it's pitch black. Like trying to like ride my bike over. And I'm like, oh, I needed like front and rear lights. Where's my like flashing everything? Yeah. So let's just kind of talk through maybe a few things that smart runners should do to be as safe as possible that we probably both neglect doing if we're being totally honest, but we should start doing more frequently.
Well, and one of the things that I live in a fairly rural community. And so when I'm running the roads out here, I've got my reflective vest. I've got a headlamp. I've got blinky lights for my ankles because.
Oh my God! Never mind. You're already doing
like
all the
I'm good. Like I'm sensible. Between my wife and my mother, I have all the flashy stuff just to make sure I'm safe. Right. So God bless both of them. They make sure I'm safe when I'm up here. I think for me, what I took for granted was what it's like when you have sidewalks. I think, and that this is probably where I landed on the conversation that we were going to have was I don't take for granted that I need to be visible when it's low light situations, when it's rural roads, where it's roads that don't have crosswalks, don't have sidewalks. But in that circumstance, I was running on a sidewalk. I work in the community that I actually grew up in, which is, it's just a half hour north of Toronto. So it is as populated as it can get. Lots of sidewalks, but lots of opportunities for people to roll through stop signs, roll through red lights. And I don't know if this is the same around where you are, but a lot of the places around me now, you can't turn right on red lights. And so as a result of that, you have ornery drivers that really want to go through during greens. And so you've got frustrated drivers. To your point, you've got lower light situations in the daytime, which also we all get moody and we get tired. So it's a rough combination. So I think in reflecting on this, thinking about, I've got all my reflective gear and my blinky gimmicks and my like light bright stuff for my rural community. I'm going to have to start using that in grand old suburbia too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think like I hate that the onus is on us to pay more attention, but you're right. Like, you're right. We kind of, when you're on a sidewalk, you sort of are lulled into this false sense of security. I'm in a sidewalk. I have a walk signal. Like, why would I even pay attention to what the cars are doing? Because I'm in a situation where they absolutely shouldn't be hitting me. It's not like at all on you. And this is not in like a victim blamey way, but unfortunately, if you don't want to get hit by a car.
Yeah, unfortunately, you have 2 tons of metal versus me who has to get x-rayed at the end. So it's like, it's this, and for anybody who, whether you've got teenage kids or you've got young kids, or I'm a cross country coach and we specific in that same community, and we either specifically run routes that where you don't have to go through crosswalks for that reason. Or two, we go through when we sign kids up. Here are some tips and tricks for how to be aware, right? So it's, you don't want to cross in packs of like 20 or 40. You want to cross roads in packs of 5. You want to make sure that you're together with people that, as I brought up during my incident, you're looking over your left shoulder when you go into the intersection. You're looking ahead of you in the, like, you're right. It's unfortunate that we have the onus on us, but I mean, the car ain't getting hurt. That guy who hit me, he's walking away just fine, right? I'm the one
he is driving
hey, maybe
away,
I gotta,
actually.
yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, I gotta put in an accident report and a police report and go to the doc and get x-rays and like all of those fun things that I had to go through. And I mean, I gotta be honest, I tried my best to sort of like dent the guy's head of a car. I mean, trying to flop on as best I could, but even in my best day, I wouldn't have been able to make a dent in the guy's car. So it's unfortunately the onus is on us. I mean, you talk about you as a runner, and I mean, I'm a little bit bigger than you. I mean, my 6'2" is a little bit, you touch a tad. I mean, you can wear heels sometimes, but it's yeah.
I could, but only if we make this recovery heel that I'm talking about.
But for you as a smaller individual, do you just do those things by tenfold, or are there specific things that you do as a runner?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting thing, because definitely in our town, especially, and I mean, I'm more aware of it because we have one, but everyone and their mother now has these sprinter vans, which are higher up. And when you're short and you come pretty close to one, like like you probably actually don't really see me like through the dashboard unless you're paying attention. So yeah, I mean, as a short person, I have to pay very close attention because trucks certainly don't see me a lot of the time. Yeah, but I think also though, like let's also point out, like I'm a woman, which means I am also spending every run looking over my shoulder, checking my peripheral, like thinking through like where would I exit this situation. Like I've done so many articles on this that like I feel like I'm reasonably like prepared for any situation, but definitely like yeah, when you're a female runner, you think through this stuff a lot more frequently, I think.
Well, and I think that's the caveat that has to be made here, especially that I want to make, is like we're talking safety from like the car safety, vehicle safety, bike safety point of view. Like me, I'm not having the, as you brought up, the issues that a female runner is going to be presented with, not have, but is going to be presented with by society, or BIPOC runners or runners who are going to be perceived differently. So for me, I'm in a fortunate circumstance. The only thing I have to worry about is getting hit by a car, not the whole host of other safety issues that you and other individuals have to consider.
Although counterpoint, you also then have like the very like male, like nothing can possibly hurt me kind of level of like Superman complex, where it like doesn't even occur to you to look for a car.
I gotta say, my ego got a couple of bonus points by like the myth of me bouncing off the car and running after the kid. I got to tell you, the myth is growing a little bit as the story goes. The butcher I used to work with, he had a line where it's the story's only as good as how you tell it. So I'm sure when I'm old and not running as much, that story's going to have 18 wheels and blood and gore. I am exceptionally grateful that I had a team there to make sure I was okay, but then also to have been able to walk away from that, because it's not always the case. I mean, you, especially in cycling, it's unfortunate the number of intersections we go to that have a wreath hanging on them because something did not go the right way for either the driver or the cyclist or the runner.
100%. Yeah. And then the other like last kind of note that I put here on safety as I was thinking through it is, I have my location shared with a few people, and I do that like largely from like I'm a woman. I get very nervous. I don't want to get kidnapped. If I get taken, I would like someone to be able to, find me. And I generally like let someone know where I'm going to be running, what I'm going to be doing. But I think that also is super applicable to this conversation around like cars and stuff, because I mean, God forbid, like
if that had been like a different run where you were just like out for a regular run, there wasn't the team right there, and you got hit and you actually were, concussed or unconscious, like it could have been like a lot worse of a situation. And, for someone to know where you were and like have your location on their phone, like that makes, and like making sure your emergency contact and stuff is all set up in your phone. Like those are really simple things that we can do just to make sure that if something does happen, we're a little more prepared and covered.
Well, and it's unfortunate that you, because you're a woman, have to do that, but it works that for me, it's like, you know what? Yeah, I probably should put in my emergency contact. I mean, I would like to think that somebody's going to call babes on my phone as opposed to like the full name of somebody and kind of put two and two together, or like call mom, like pretty easy. But yeah, to your point, that the location, those are good things for me to know, especially running in some of the rural communities that I know I run in, now unfortunately in some of the other spots. So that's a learning for me, and it's unfortunate that why you had to learn that, but something I'll plug in tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like this, you can also be the more old school. Like there are those runner IDs that have been around for so long. And I know when my dad started riding more, I got him one that had all his like emergency info, because he wouldn't take his phone on rides. Cause I don't know, he's not of that generation that brings phones with him anywhere, which is unhinged to me, but totally normal for him. So I was like,
so my wife's gonna kill me for telling the story, but when she was pregnant, she justifiably would get more concerned with me going out for runs. So me facetiously, and any partner, spouse, don't follow in my footsteps, because it did not end well. But I actually took a black Sharpie and wrote on my arm, I was like, if lost, please call this, that number. And I showed it to her. It's like, see, look, now people are going to know where I was. Anyone, this did not end well. Funny story, really bad experience. So yeah, runner ID, phone, Sharpie, any of them would be great ideas.
You know what? Sharpie in a pinch. I'm actually okay with it. But yes, were I your pregnant wife, I would have murdered you right then and there.
Yeah, I shouldn't have been able to run the 100-milers. I shouldn't be here right now.
Yeah. Hard to do that with broken kneecaps,
Yeah. Hey, you think you're going out for a run? Think again.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. Okay, I could clearly talk to you all day, but we should wrap up. So tell everyone where they can listen to you continue these conversations, including, I'm excited for this upcoming two guys talking Triple Crown situation you've got going here.
Well, and thank you to future Triple Crown holder, potentially, Molly Herford, but it's every time that we are able to chat, it's whether it's on our podcast or now on Consummate Athlete, or I feel like I learn more about you, and I appreciate that, and in little ways learn about myself. And so it's the Athletics Ontario Running Podcast. We have rebranded from the original Trillium Running Podcast because, as we said, right, we want the local, we want the province, we want the brand to be about what it's about, and it's Athletics Ontario. It's the same company I redid a website for when I was like 14 years old. It's the one that I was selling watches at track meets. It's the one that I went with my granddad to. It's that Athletics Ontario that, and I call it's the blue check mark for any race that you love, right? If you want to know that a race is safe, it's supported, you look for that Athletics Ontario sanctioning, or you listen to the Athletics Ontario Running Podcast, of which we highlight many of them, and that is a race that's been vetted, whether it's your big TCS Toronto waterfront marathons or some of your smaller 5K, 10K trail events throughout Ontario.
I love it. John, thank you so much. The feeling is 100% mutual, and I'm so excited to see you at the races again sometime soon.
And drivers, make sure you stop and share your insurance whenever situations like this occur.
Amen.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.